The following program is a presentation of DC Communications, LLC. Warning, you are about to listen to the greatest radio show ever. And due to contractual obligations and to shield our airwaves' corporate licensees from any semblance of liability, responsibility, and gullibility, we must tell you the views represented on this show are not necessarily those of this station or its management. This radio show contains differing points of view on current political topics, and due to the nature of its content, it should be heard by everyone. Thank you for listening.
3, 2, 2, 1.
Now, live from the Mike 92.1 studios, where the political party is just beginning, welcome to the Devil's Advocate Show. Best friends proving it's never personal, only politics. And now, here are your hosts, Dom and Crute.
Welcome back. Hour 2 of the Devil's Advocates radio show, and perhaps the happy hour comes early today. Dominic, I've been joined live in studio here in Madison by Russ Feingold.
Hey.
Russ, welcome back to the Devil's Advocates radio show.
Great to be in the studio this time.
And my apologies. Last we spoke to you, sir, we were at the DNC, and Mark Pocan was cutting off your phone line.
I have a huge problem with that guy all the time.
I think he was undermining your candidacy, Russ.
No, Mark wouldn't do that.
Maybe he's got his eyes on a higher position in the future.
Well, I tell you, he'd be a good one for that.
Russ, we got most of the small talk out of the way before we came on the air, so I want to jump right into it. Russ, I got to ask, any merit to the Republican claims that you were in essence campaigning for the U.S. Senate while employed at the U.S. State Department, sir?
Of course not. This is what incumbent politicians who are scared do. They start just making stuff up, and that's all this is. You know, when I went to the State Department, I knew that people might try to talk to me about politics. So I called people up and I said, look, I'm not going to be able to talk about running for office if I'm in this position. And so I found out the rules. I followed the rules very carefully, and I think people know me. I'm very careful about things like that. I wouldn't do such a thing.
Well, I would hope you were smart enough to at least compartmentalize, sir. When did your tenure at the State Department end, if I may ask?
In March of 2015.
And when did you declare your candidacy? And just to clarify, you were in the state of Wisconsin when you declared as a candidate. Were you
Yes,
not,
I
Russ?
was. That was the first ridiculous charge by the Republicans that I wasn't in the state. So we had to actually prove that I was in the state because of the pathetic nature of the arguments they've used. I mean, all this is an argument to distract from the real issues. They're in trouble in this race, and they know it. And it's going to be a tough, close race. But they're trying to say, well, what's going to stick? What can we do to try to put some mud on this guy? And the reality is it's because they don't want to talk about the issues because they lose on every major issue. Being against raising the minimum wage. Senator Johnson's against that. Being against making sure students can negotiate lower interest rates on their loans. Being against the federal government being able to have ability to have lower prescription drug prices. On all these issues, he's wrong. And so what he's saying is, well, let's make up some story over here. It's the political silly season. Even the newspaper accounts have said this is the kind of nonsense that kind of goes on in political campaigns. It's too bad, but, I'm comfortable with it.
Russ, I assure you, will give you opportunity to contrast yourself with Ron Johnson. Let me ask you, though, your political opponents have filed lots of freedom of information requests for your emails. State Department controls the timeline. My understanding, we may see these in December. Of course, that would be after the elective time frame. My question, sir, is this purely political partisanship? Is this simply, and I think maybe you've started to answer it, is this simply besmirching your opponent? Or are there any emails, Russ, you'd like to get out in front of?
Of course not. And here's the thing. They control this process completely. I'm not working there. I don't have that material, of course. It's at the State Department, and I have literally no ability to affect the process. But it's irrelevant because this is all a made-up deal. This is nothing but some kind of a way to make a charge without any evidence at all.
And Russ, do you think they've targeted your email specifically? If Hillary Clinton as a candidate has a vulnerability, it is her emails. But you have not avoided your embrace of Hillary Clinton. We've heard you talk about the Clinton Foundation and your thoughts on that. By contrast, let's talk about Ron Johnson for just a minute. He gets very coy on certain topics, and Donald Trump is one of them. Of course, we know he's not been forthcoming on TPP or Badger pledges. but whether or not he can support Trump in his embrace of Putin, that seems like an obvious answer, and Ron Johnson's failed to make any sort of answer. What's your thought on your opponent in that regard?
I've never seen somebody who claims not to be a politician act more like a politician. I mean, literally saying that you're not going to announce how you're going to vote on the Trans-Pacific Partnership till after the election, saying that you support but don't endorse Donald Trump, and people actually gave him a dictionary to see if he could find the difference between those two things. I mean, people deserve to know where somebody stands. So, look, Hillary Clinton is obviously not a perfect person, but I support her, and I don't hesitate in saying that. He literally did not even appear with Donald Trump, saying that his schedule was too busy to appear with Donald Trump more than once. So, yeah, it's a sort of a game of trying to avoid accountability. You have to be accountable for who you're supporting for president, especially when you're an incumbent United States senator. You can't just stand back and say, well, I'm running my race, and the fact that I support a guy that says this stuff about Putin or calls the generals a mess, you got to own that stuff.
Well, you can't have the Ronald and Donald show without Ronald.
Yeah, what's going on? When's the show going to start?
Folks, you're listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show. We've got Russ Feingold in the studio in Madison talking politics with us today. Russ, Senator Johnson plays up the HSGAC, the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee that he chairs in the Senate. And he puts this out there as one reason that he should remain in the office. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's a guy that claims he's not a politician who's saying his achievement is that somehow he stood in line and became a chairman of a committee. The test here is whether you're doing your job as chairman of that committee. And, the fact is Senator Johnson missed 50 to 60% of critical hearings on national security and related issues before he became chairman of that committee. And now the question is, in this race, who would be stronger in terms of the issue of really getting rid of ISIS? Senator Johnson's view is that we should send 100,000 troops, including some Americans, into the region, into Syria and Iraq, sort of take over part of the area. And then he was asked, what would you do the next day? And he said, well, we'll talk to the neighboring countries. Well, we've already done that. That's how we got into this mess. The president has needed new authority, a new authorization of military force to go after ISIS for some time. Senator Johnson hasn't lifted a finger to do that. Now, here's the contrast. I have proposed a specific plan to choke off ISIS, and this is really my main focus on this. This organization is already being weakened, but can be weakened even more if we accelerate the efforts to kill their top leaders. And there is a special ops operation that's doing that, but it needs to be accelerated. The acceleration has to include being able to identify more of where these folks are. And that would include places like Syria and Iraq, but it also be places like Libya and other places where they might be. That means we need more human intelligence. We need more spies. We need more people who can get on the ground and identify them. We have to cut off their ability to produce oil and to transport oil, which is one of the major ways they survive. We need to use our capacities through the Department of Treasury and other ways to use the internet to cut off financial transfers, which they do get. And we need to do something about the fact they get a lot of their arms through that Turkish border. Now, apparently the Turks claim now that they've closed off that border and ISIS doesn't have anything on the border. So the time now, this is the opportunity to really ratchet up the ability to prevent them from getting arms. And by the way, there hasn't been real pressure from Senator Johnson or anyone else on another player in this region, which is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, is a country that we want to have a good relationship with for a variety of reasons, and they want to have a good relationship with us. But they're trying to have it both ways. They finance Wahhabism, an extreme ideology, and they send it all over the world to get people to become radicalized, go away from their moderate Islam into a really hateful kind of Islam against Americans. I saw this happening in Mali, in Africa, in Ethiopia. Reports are that it's going on in Kosovo, in Europe. Where's the leadership from Senator Johnson or anyone else in saying, wait a minute, these guys can't have it both ways? So this is the nature of a real plan, a specific plan, and I'm ready to act on it. I spent 5 years on the Intelligence Committee, and when I was a special envoy to Africa, I worked with intelligence people on a day-to-day basis so that I have an idea about how you go about these things. And frankly, Senator Johnson just gets on Fox News when there's a tragedy, and then you don't hear much from him about it after that.
Well, Russ, you kind of started answering my question about what you would do with Aleppo, but let me get a little bit into that.
Yeah, that's always a good.
Are you trying to Gary Johnson the guy?
Don't Aleppo me.
Are we able to do that? Does your plan? Are we able to defeat ISIS with the plan that you have? And of course, Hillary Clinton said that we would not commit any ground troops, or at least any more ground troops. Is it feasible to do that with just air support and intelligence and using allies in the region in a reasonable timeline?
No, Americans are helping with some of these operations. And, I don't oppose that if that involves going after ISIS. Look, I voted for the Afghanistan war. I voted to go after Osama bin Laden. I'm not against taking tough action, but surely I don't believe it's a good idea to put large numbers of ground troops in either Iraq or Syria from the United States. But what I do think is we have certain capacities, and sometimes some of our people, it can be intelligence people, it can be other people, sometimes military people, can help them with some of these operations. Some of the successes recently in retaking Fallujah and some of the places in Iraq, and also retaking some of the cities in Syria, have been assisted by some of our people. But the difference here is the idea that Senator Johnson has, which is let's just send 100,000 troops there and see what happens. I'm interested in targeted attacks to destroy their leaders and retake the territory. And frankly, a fair amount of that is already happening, but we have to accelerate it.
Russ, I'll be honest. I don't have an Aleppo plan. Let me ask you, though, did Secretary Clinton err at all the other night in the Commander-in-Chief Forum when she stated we're not putting ground troops back in Iraq or Syria? Did she take an option off the table? Is it ill-advised for a president ever to take an option off the table?
My own view is generally you don't take options off the table. When we were talking about Iran in the past, of course, I feel strongly that we cannot allow Iran to operate with nuclear weapons. It's one of the reasons I supported the Iran deal. But in my thoughts about that issue, I never was comfortable taking any option off the table. That doesn't mean you put it on the table. That doesn't mean you do something like Senator Johnson does, which is lead with a foolish idea, like putting 100,000 troops there. But no, I am more likely in the work that I've done in the Foreign Relations Committee in the past and others to say, look, here are the options, and we can keep them there. But, of course, I would be one of the first to question any idea of sending more ground troops into Iraq, because I led the fight against the Iraq War, and I opposed it. So the idea that would be a good idea is very, very unlikely. But, I don't think it's necessarily a great idea to say never would you ever do something.
Russ, in that same vein, North Korea last night lit off another nuclear weapon, their fifth, I believe. What are we doing in the Far East? What do we do with North Korea?
Well, we have to really look at this issue as an issue beyond politics. This is a crazy regime. And, not just under this guy, but the previous leader. They're incredibly hard to rely on in terms of any representations. They are a brutal regime that treat their people extremely cruelly. So our goal should be to get this guy out of there and basically put him on trial for war crimes. That should be the end game. And they shouldn't be in control. But in the meantime, we have to use all the levers we have. I think enhanced sanctions, as the president talked about, whatever the United States can do, whatever the UN can do. And what's most effective here is going to the Chinese, who do want a relationship with us. They have the best ability to force North Korea to behave, to ask the Chinese to please take more steps. So I think we should attack it on our own level, the UN level, and working with the Chinese to have sanctions in this situation.
Russ, you sure it's not best to fight crazy with crazy? I mean, I saw Trump the other night in that Commander-in-Chief Forum. I really was wondering, is this man crazy? We're never crazy. We've got a fine guest live in studio, Russ Feingold here in Madison. We'll bring him back a few more minutes here. Dom, come back with us. More Devil's Advocates.
Pushing up the ante, I know you got to see me. Read 'em and weep, the dead man's hand again.
So relevant, we have one foot in tomorrow. The Devil's Advocates on the Mike 92.1.
And we are back from the 420 break. Thank you so much for listening. Please check us out on Facebook, The Devil's Advocates Radio. Follow us on Twitter at Devil Radio. And be sure to check out the website, darnwi.com.
Dominic, right here in Madison, I got a fine guest nearby. Russ Feingold's in studio with me. Russ, I've been in the car a little bit today. I've heard a couple of your new ads. Well, one ad specifically a couple times. This one attacks your opponent, Ron Johnson. And the topic is opioid drug abuse. And Russ, you essentially say he has been up there for 6 years now, and he's done little or nothing to solve this problem. And in fact, if anything, he's had the opportunity to vote for meaningful legislation that would solve this problem, and he's chosen not to. He's voted against. Russ, so many different ways you could possibly criticize your opponent. Why this line of attack, sir?
Well, because this is a terrible emergency and tragedy, and Senator Johnson wasn't paying attention to it. In fact, because he doesn't get around the state and talk to people, he didn't start even hearing about it apparently until a few months ago. And so, okay, that's fine, but what happens then is what do you do about it? And what we need here is education for people at the high school level. We need even better education for those who provide the treatment. We need treatment alternatives that are better funded. We have to make sure that corporations and others aren't pushing people to use these kinds of painkillers that can lead to this kind of addiction. So there are clear things that need to be done. And there was a key amendment that would have provided a relatively modest amount of money, $622 million, for these kinds of things. Senator Baldwin, of course, voted for it, but so did some key Republicans, like Senator Portman of Ohio. Senator Johnson voted no. I mean, he said actually that, well, you can't just throw money at the problem. Well, I'm sorry. You can't have it both ways. You can't run around the state saying this is a crisis, it's an emergency, but when there's emergency funding, voting no. So, either it's used as a political thing where you like to just talk about it, or you're really going to try to help these families. And I run into families all the time, both at the personal level and also as a candidate, who tell you the stories of people that have been harmed so horribly by this. And by the way, it is opioids, but yesterday I was hearing about meth over in Eau Claire, about the continued concerns there for that. So you can't just pick one thing, and you can't sort of say, look, I really care about this. This is important to me, but when it comes time to vote, you got to vote for the help. And he didn't.
Well, Russ, I got to tell you, I've seen so many different opportunities to potentially be critical of our buddy Ron, but the week or so ago, we're at a Wisp Politics luncheon, and Johnson's proposal is to eliminate, history teachers and replace them with the 14-hour Ken Burns video. And while it seemed like a funny headline at the time, and it was quite astounding he would make such a proposition, I asked him later after that event about his support, or at least blocking the regulation of the for-profit college industry. Russ, we got a problem right here in the state of Wisconsin. ITT has closed its doors. We got students that were Wisconsinites that are not going to be able to continue or finish their education. The governor of the state of Wisconsin wanted to eliminate the self-funded board that did oversight on for-profit colleges. And Ron Johnson, when similar to perhaps this opioid issue, when given the opportunity to vote for legislation that would help regulate the industry, has chosen to vote with the for-profit colleges. Russ, I want to get your opinion, A, on the for-profit college industry, and B, do you contrast yourself with Ron Johnson on this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, there doesn't seem to be an area of public policy where big money doesn't try to get in and take over and get the goodies. And this is a very sad thing, and including veterans being targeted to go to these schools, these for-profit schools. This needs to be seriously regulated. And sadly, Senator Johnson voted against it. But this, all of this isn't really about how many criticisms we can have of Senator Johnson. It's not really about me versus him in terms of persons or individuals. What it is whose side are you on in terms of these issues? On the issue of student loans, I stand with the students of this state and their families. I believe we have to make sure that you can renegotiate that student loan, that you don't use the excess money that comes into the government for other things, but you use it to make student loans more affordable, that we can have a partnership at all levels to make it so that people can come out of college debt-free when it comes to tuition. Those are the positive things that I believe in. Senator Johnson's view is that there shouldn't even be a federal student loan program at all. So whether it's the minimum wage, where he doesn't believe you should have a minimum wage, a federal minimum wage, or whether it's making sure the federal government can renegotiate pharmaceutical costs, drug costs, he votes for the pharmaceutical industry. I would vote to regulate that. On every one of those issues, I have listened to the people of Wisconsin last year and this year in all counties, at least twice, and the difference between us is he doesn't vote with us. He votes against us.
Folks, you're listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show. We are speaking with Russ Feingold. How are we doing on time here? We running out of time?
You got the last question, buddy.
All right, last question for you, Russ. I understand you have started a jobs and wages tour. That's a two-part question. What are you hoping to accomplish there? And I also saw an article recently, a study by Wistax, talking about the outward migration of people from the state of Wisconsin. Are you aware of that? And apparently this, according to the article and Todd Berry at Wistax, this is one of the biggest economic problems we're going to face in the next 20 years. Just want to get your thoughts, Ross.
Well, that's exactly what our tour is about. Of course, we're concerned that working and middle-income families aren't able to pay their bills. That's the concern I hear the most. But there's a lot of positive stuff going on. And by the way, that study may show what it shows, but I have found people coming into the state. There's innovation going on in places like a machine shop in Chippewa Falls. People starting a wonderful coffee operation in Viroqua. They came in from out of state. So I actually see a reverse. I see in a lot of rural areas of the state where people used to think there was an opportunity. With the internet now and the quality of life, a lot of people want to come to Wisconsin who aren't even from here. So let's highlight the positive, and that's what our tour was about. This innovation is fabulous. There are so many cool things going on in the state, but you don't know about it if you just stay in Washington and go on Fox News. There are fantastic innovations going on all over this state, and I know right now a heck of a lot about it because that's what I've been doing for over a year. I've been just finding out the cool things that are being done around the state, and we were over at Organic Valley the other day. Goodness, that is one of the great companies I've ever seen. They have, I think 800 employees now, 1,800 farmers in a co-op.
Wow.
One of the most progressive things, and it was started by just a couple of guys back in the day over in western Wisconsin, and now it's one of the greatest companies of the world of this kind. You got to know what Wisconsin's all about to represent the people of the state. That's what I do.
Russ Feingold, thank you so much. I know you're out of time. We are as well. We're going to break. Coming back, more Devil's Advocates.